Hey Quilty friends, I'm Natalia Bonner and I've got another fun little sneak peek machine quilting video to share with you today. So this really cute quilt that I'm going to share with you is it's a Kimberbell design that was made by my local quilt shop ladies at Quilted Works, and they do have kits for this cute quilt available there at Quilted Works if you're interested. I will put a link to their quilt shop down below. Okay, so this super fun quilt, I'm going to share just a little snippet of the machine quilting here with you. Over on my Patreon page, I do have a more in-depth, full-length video where I share a lot more of my process. But I hope today that I can at least inspire you a little bit in your own machine quilting journey with some of my machine quilting. So just a couple of things before we actually get to the machine quilting video. I do all of my machine quilting on a Gamel 22-inch machine. The quilting that I will share with you today is hand-guided quilting. The batting that I'm using on this particular quilt is one layer of Quilter's Dream wool, and the threads that I'm using are So Fine by Superior Threads. That's what I'm using on the top, and then on my bobbin I'm using Bottom Line, that's also by Superior Threads. So I do have most of these products available for purchase on my website, peaceandquilt.com. And I just want to tell you one quick thing, or more thing, I guess, before we get to the video. I do have a fun Thread of the Month club available on my website. So we have it for the So Fine thread and also the Bottom Line thread. I'll also put links to those down in the description. You can check those out. But let's get to the machine quilting. So like I often mention here, when I begin my machine quilting, I like to start out with the outside border. I am working on my long arm, so obviously I can only quilt what fits in my throat space. Now I do have this quilt loaded on my machine sideways because it's a tall, skinny quilt, and I'm just able to fit a little bit more in my throat space if I load it on the machine and quilt it sideways than loading it on straight. So that's something I like to do if it's possible, if I feel like maybe that will save me a little bit of time. So the first thing I do is stitch out my spine. I start stitching on the left side of the quilt, stitch all the way across, and then come back to that left side. You'll notice as I do stitch out those feathers, I don't actually go through and mark out my spine or anything like that. I just do kind of a wavy, fun line and then make sure that I curve out around the corners. Then when I begin stitching my feathers, I come back to my original starting point on the left side of the quilt, and I am going to quilt the bump back feathers so that I can easily add that curl in. So as you'll notice here, I'll begin by quilting. Occasionally I'll add in a curl. It's not going to be every single time. So instead of bumping back every time, sometimes I'll just do a curl and then use that as my bump back, really making it a little bit more playful. Okay, so I have done some quilting on the body of the quilt. We'll come back to that in a minute, but I've had several people ask me lately, how do you get your feathers, especially in a border, to nest together to look really nice and fluid if there's no marking done ahead of time? So right here, this is how I do it. On the left side of the quilt, where my feather looks like it's going up, I'll begin stitching my spine where I left off at the feathers. So from there, I'll continue stitching. I'll start stitching there, stitch a wavy spine, going down as far as my throat space will allow me. When I get to that lowest point, then from there, I'll go into stitching the feathers, filling in one side. Personally, just to not create a lot of thread buildup, I'll clip my threads before starting again on the opposite side of that feather. So as I'm working my way up the feather, I will be paying attention as I'm quilting those feathers, paying attention and adjusting spacing where needed. So occasionally I will have to make some feathers that are maybe a little bit wider and some feathers that might be a little bit skinnier, just to make them fit in really nicely together, make them look like they nest nicely. A big factor that does play into this is the way that you do start down at the bottom of your feather though. So I'll start with a feather that I can tell will easily nest with the next feather. So then on the opposite side of the quilt, I've got to connect my feather to the feather that this time, I guess I should say, is above it. So the very first thing that I'll do is stitch out my spine. Again, I'll start stitching from where I left off and just continue that wavy line. From that wavy line, then I'll stitch all the way down as far as my throat space will allow me. Then I'll cut my threads, come back to those previous feathers and start stitching my feathers from there. Again, with this particular design, I'm kind of mixing in the swirly feathers with regular feathers just to make it more playful. So if you do want more information, more of this type of feathers, more playful feathers like I quilt, do make sure you check out my book, Visual Guide to Free Motion Quilting Feathers.